All right, so in this episode, I'm talking to my friend Andy, who is a primary or elementary school teacher, if you happen to be across the pond. And we're talking about how he got into being a primary school teacher, what some of the things he's doing day to day as part of being a primary school teacher are, and we're also going to talk a little bit about how we think that primary school teaching might change over time. Disclaimer alert, we kind of started off with some of the more negative stuff. So we did talk about marking and paid work and admin to start off with. If you want to know about the nice side of the job, that does come later on. So we have balanced it, talking about the things that are really exciting about being a primary school teacher, as well as the things that are not so great. So do stick with it and get to that part, because I think that's where the real good stuff about being a primary school teacher is. So without any further ado, let's get started talking about that. So I think it makes sense to kind of start at the beginning. So can things that I currently know sort of led into being a primary school teacher, and there's probably things I don't know as well. So things I currently know, you obviously spent years working at summer camp and getting kind of experience in that direction.
Yep,
I know that at university, I think you did film and media. Is that
I
right?
did.
Um, and I think that you actually worked at your school for a bit before you were actually a full-time teacher there. So is that
Yeah,
somewhat accurate?
that is quite accurate. On top of that, my mum is a higher level teaching assistant, or was a higher level teaching assistant. And they basically needed at one point, when I'd finished university, I didn't really know what to do. I was kind of applying for jobs here, there, and everywhere just to get some money, basically. I ended up working in Frankie and Benny's because I didn't really know what to do with my life at that point. I'd done a film and media degree, but that was kind of more because that's what I was interested in. I didn't really know if I wanted a career in it. So I ended up, my mum's school was looking for someone just to come in for a day and set up some video stuff. So a laptop with internet access and link up to the projector. And so I went in to help. Ended up just going into one of the classrooms for a bit and doing a bit of work with some of the kids, and really enjoyed it. So I ended up going back after doing all the DBS checks and everything, and volunteering pretty much full time there for nearly a year up until going back to camp again. And then got back from camp the following year and there was a job opening as a teaching assistant. So applied for that, got that job. And while I was doing my teaching assistant job that year, I started applying for different ways of getting into teaching.
Okay, so at this point, you hadn't done like any teacher training or anything. You were just kind
Nope.
of, there is
This
this
was,
thing going, I'm going to do this.
yeah, this was just something, because I mean, I enjoyed working with children from being at camp and stuff like that. I knew it was something that I was all right at. So it was another avenue to explore, basically. So tried it out and really enjoyed it.
Okay, yeah. So kind of, I guess, if you hadn't enjoyed working with like the kids and stuff at camp, I guess you'd have just been like, hell no, I don't want to go work in this school. So I guess that was quite an important
Yeah, I
part of
mean,
it.
yeah, definitely. I
Um,
never would have been thought about it if it wasn't for working at camp and stuff.
okay, yeah, makes sense. I think having some experience with what some teachers refer to as the enemy is, is somewhat useful before you go in.
Mm,
Um, so you're just so kind of like based on kind of other people who do like work at your school that you've met, like is that kind of a typical pathway in, or is that quite unusual?
Not always. I mean, there's different pathways into teaching. Some people do it a lot later in life. Some people do it straight out of college and do a 3-year degree. And often some of them have done like maybe 10 days in school before that. I think the minimum experience you need for PGCE is about 2 weeks worth of
Yeah.
school experience, whereas I had 2 years nearly. So it was a bit different. I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew the amount of work that it would be, and some people do go into a PGC or a 3-year teaching degree and aren't really sure about don't really know how much work it's actually going to entail.
Yeah, we can kind of get on to like what that actually looks like on a typical day. Okay, so um, obviously, I know about like secondary teachers in that like most of them have kind of done a degree in something else,
Mm.
somewhat related to what they teach. Then they'll do like a after degree, some kind of teacher training usually, or they go straight into a job or whatever. Is that also true in primary school, or a lot of more people done like the 3 year teacher training?
Yeah,
That
there are
you
quite
went?
a lot of done. I know quite a lot of people have done the 3 year teacher training. There's also like the PGCE, like I did, which was where you go back to school after you go back to university after doing a 3 year degree and do an extra year where you do your teacher training. There's other avenues. I mean, schools direct has become a thing in recent years where you're basically working in a school and learning on the job.
Yeah.
There was a similar avenue like that when I started looking at teacher training, which was called the Graduate Teacher Program.
Oh yeah,
Which,
the one you could never get on because
yeah,
they were like they paid you money while you
yeah,
did
you
it.
got about 15 grand for the year, and you were paid to do it, and you were being paid as like a teacher basically.
Hmm.
But that it no longer exists, surprisingly.
Have you at your school? Have you had people on like schools direct or anything
Yeah,
like that?
we've over the last couple of years we've had started getting schools direct students in. It's a strange one in some ways, schools direct, because I know the timetable for our schools direct students, they can be in for a week and then they can be out training for a week, and then they don't seem to get into a flow of actually teaching sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I know PGC, you were there for an 8 week block a lot of the
Yeah.
time,
Um,
and it seems a lot more full on in that time.
yeah. Although I kind of, when I was doing my PGC, I kind of wished that I just got like planted in a school for 2 weeks,
Mm.
screwed up all the things that all brand new teachers screw up, and then you get like then you go into your like 8 week block because obviously with the classes I remember taking over, it was just a bit like they remember all the stupid things that you did when you like first walked into the room, and it's just a bit like,
Mm.
oh, gotta live with this for another 6 weeks. But somewhat a useful lesson for when you're actually a teacher. You can't really
Yeah.
afford to screw up on the first day too much. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I found the last placement I did, especially, was I think it was an 8 or 10 week placement, something like that. But the first 2 weeks, I didn't have to teach. I just got to settle into school, do a lot of find out what I was supposed to be teaching, do a lot of my planning, get to know the kids that I was going to be teaching, and I think I did 2 half-hour lessons in that time, just to kind of get my confidence in front of the class and get to know them, and then get to know what I was like as a teacher. And I thought that was a really good way of doing it, to be honest.
Okay. So I just kind of trying to track your halfway through this. So you started off just doing some tech stuff in a school. Then you were a teaching assistant for a year.
Well, I was volunteering as a teaching assistant for a year, basically, just as an extra pair of hands. I only did the kind of tech stuff for one afternoon, really.
Okay.
It was after that was kind of my first real route into school. And then after that, I kind of started volunteering basically as a teaching assistant. And then, after that, I got a job as a teaching assistant for almost a year.
Okay. And then that's when you went on and got into your actual PGCE training.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you are now back at that same school again.
I am.
So did you actually kind of, so you left the school for a year to do your PGC and then came back?
Yeah. So luckily when I was looking for a job after my PGCE, this school had 2 openings. So I managed to get a job as the year 6 teacher, which I still work as now.
And because I have no real sense of how difficult it is to, from the very limited experience, I'm aware that it can be quite difficult to get jobs as a primary school teacher. Does that kind of reflect what you know about it?
It is very competitive. I mean, to be honest, I've only had one job, so I don't know what it's like going out and applying for other jobs at the moment. I know at the moment it's probably more competitive with everything going on. I know schools are getting 200 applicants for one job because there are that few jobs going at the moment, and there are a lot of teachers that are just qualifying. So it is super competitive at the moment. We had a teacher on secondment who's come back to us this year, but the teacher that was kind of covering for him is now having to work as a TA because she just can't find jobs out there.
Wow. Okay.
So in this area anyway, I don't know what it's like. But I work in the northwest of England. I don't know what it's like in other areas at the moment.
Okay. So kind of when they talk about sort of nationwide teacher shortages, they're probably not talking about primary school teachers.
And they're probably not talking about this the northwest either, because I mean we have multiple universities that are churning out teachers as well, all in one small area. And yeah, it's very competitive for jobs around here. I suppose if you went down to London or somewhere, it might be completely different.
Yeah, London is a completely different animal for pretty much everything. So, yeah. Okay, so that's kind of how you ended up there. So you arrive at school at some horribly early hour?
About 8 o'clock at the moment.
Oh, that's not too bad.
It's not too bad. I prefer to work late and not get there too early in the morning.
Okay, yeah.
I know there are teachers that will turn up at like 6:30 and stay till about 4 o'clock, but I prefer to do it the other way and turn up about 8 and then stay till 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Okay, but that's something that you have the flexibility to do.
Yeah.
That your school's not like you should be doing X.
No.
Okay. Okay, so you arrive at school. What are you doing?
Basically getting sorted for the day, turn my computer on, get all my lessons prepped, all my resources ready, any last minute photocopy I need to do. We're quite lucky actually because we do have a photocopier right outside my classroom, and so we have like a photocopier for each department, so it's not as difficult as everyone rushing to the one photocopier in the school, trying to get things photocopied all at the same time.
Okay, so for people listening to this who don't quite understand why Andy's going on about a photocopier, the photocopiers are the bane of a teacher's life because they're always broken. There's always a massive line when you arrive at them. So having an easy to access photocopier that works most of the time is an incredible bonus.
We're actually in a really lucky position because we have 2 in our building within about 20 feet of each other.
Yeah. So you might wonder why we would jump to photocopiers. That's just that's a teacher thing. Okay, so you've gone in, all your text turned on. You've done some photocopying because everyone always has some photocopying to do. We might talk about that later on with how education is going to change over the next few years. But at the moment, lots of photocopying happens. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So then basically make sure I get a brew as well before I start teaching. Really do need a coffee in the morning to get me going. And normally there's not much of a queue for that either. And then you just basically wait until 5 to 9, the bell goes, and you go outside and greet the children. They're all lined up outside, and you bring them in. And yeah, they'll come in. Generally, I'll have some work on the board that I've set for them to be getting on with when they come in, so I can do the register, which has actually changed a little bit recently because in the last 6 months, we've now got electronic registers on touchscreen TVs, so they come in and they tap their name and what they would like to order for the lunch, and then they go and sit down and get on with the work.
I imagine Corona is going to throw that system out the window.
Yep, that is going to be completely different when we come back.
Okay. So just to rewind slightly, so like when you're going out and getting the kids, are you having have they already been extracted from their parents by this point, or are you at that point kind of also meeting and greeting parents as well as doing that?
I mean, in year 6, they don't have to come with a parent. They're allowed to walk to school on their own. So some parents will be there. Some parents will ask you a couple of questions every so often. But generally, if I need to speak to a parent, I'll get in touch with them over the phone. I don't have that much contact with parents in the morning, really.
Okay. So just to kind of pause with what you're doing and just go to a more general question, how much of your week do you typically spend actually communicating with parents?
Not a great deal, I'd say. I make a couple of phone calls a week maybe, speak to a couple after school every so often, but it's not a great deal unless there's something happened that I need to speak to them about. Generally not a major amount of time. Okay. So you've got some kids in. They, depending on the virus situation, they may or may not have ordered their lunch and tapped in and stuff. What kind of stuff are you getting them to do? So this is year 6. A lot of the time in the morning it'd be basic skills, maths or English. So it could be spelling work. It could be multiplication things, division, catch up, revising things that we've done already, like fractions and percentages, little just quick questions that they can be doing and working on that we can quickly go over at the end and clarify any misconceptions, basically.
Okay, I just realized I should have clarified. Year 6 means like 10, 11.
Yeah, 10, 11.
Yeah.
Last year of primary school.
Yeah. And so like while they're so this is something they're doing on their own, they're doing in like pairs, groups, or
this is something to do on their own, just to kind of settle them down when they come in, get them kind of in the mood for working, basically.
And so you've got your feet up on the desk.
No. Normally, I'm doing any admin stuff at this point that I need to do. So we do have a lot of money coming in every on some days, like music tuition money, trip money, anything like that is generally brought into school. That is slowly changing, but so I'm logging things like that, or I'm checking on. Sometimes I'm going around checking on what they're doing. It really depends on the day.
Yeah. So it kind of leads into a slight tangent here. So like, again, kind of in a typical day or a typical week, I think if you read enough of the headlines, everyone's got this idea that teachers are kind of buried in paperwork and stuff, kind of like you're just describing there. How much of a reality is that for you?
There is a lot. I mean, it really depends on your school. My school is quite relaxed with it. Not relaxed as in they don't make you do anything, but as in that anything that's really unnecessary, that they think there's no point doing and it can be done in a different way, we won't do it. Okay. I think we are, like, our school is very down to earth with things like that, whereas other schools there will be menial tasks to do.
Yeah. Is that kind of down to like your head teacher? Is that his kind of thing?
It's down to the SLT. It's down to your senior leadership team.
Okay.
So your head, your deputy, assistant heads, head of key stage, people like that.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, there is still quite a bit to do, especially if you include marking as paperwork as well, which we have cut. We have changed the way we mark over the last few years, and it has kind of cut down what we need to do. So we were writing quite long comments, but now we're focusing more on symbols that the children know what they mean, or abbreviated like acronyms and things like that. So the children know what they mean and they can instantly see what they've done well, where they need to improve. And we're not writing a big long comment saying, you have done this really well, you need to improve on this kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so if we can kind of like break it down a little bit. So like in a typical day, if we don't count marking, because we can do that as a separate thing, how much time would you say you spend just doing kind of admin-y related kind of thing, you know, like sending and answering emails, logging data and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it could be half an hour or so. Some days it could be up to an hour. Other days, it's very different each day. It really depends what you've been doing, and like if we've done an assessment or anything, then you've got to log all those scores. If we've got an event coming up, I might be sending and responding to emails on that. It really depends on what's going on in school at that time.
And the kind of same question with like marking, like how much of that are you doing in a typical day?
I mean, potentially we do 2 lessons. We do a maths and English lesson in the morning. Then we'll do 2 other lessons in the afternoon. So you could potentially have 4 lessons of marking there. Plus, we get comment books in each day off different children. So you might have 6 comment books to read through and mark as well. The big thing for marking at the moment is pieces of writing, because we can potentially be moderated on those, where we have an external moderator come in and look at how we've assessed our writing for the year. So that's where our judgments need to be spot on. So we do, myself and my co-year 6 teachers, we do spend a lot of time on marking writing, and that's probably the biggest bulk of our marking.
So that's something you're doing daily?
But I'd say weekly. We're more looking at that, because we don't mark them as they are doing a piece of writing, because they need to be a bit more independent with that, if you get what I mean. We don't want to influence. How do I put this? You might need to tweak this bit. we don't want to kind of say, we can't go through and say, you've made a spelling mistake there, you need to go and correct that. They need to look back and find their own errors, basically.
So it's about guiding self-reflection rather than, again.
Yeah. So it's kind of talking as a class, right? We'll go back and look through your work, have a think where you may have made spelling errors, have a think where you could, where you may have missed punctuation, things like that. We can't go, you missed a full stop there, you need to put it in.
So, okay, so given that you started with, we may need to edit this part. So is that a externally driven thing, or is that we want to get students, like, as in we think it's important they self-reflect? You nodded with the first part.
It's a bit of both, really. It is externally driven if really we are not allowed to tell them that. But towards the beginning of the year, we do kind of start giving them a lot of guidance on finding their own errors, reflecting on what they've been doing. So each lesson I do get them to do a self-assessment, or each piece of writing, especially, I get them to do a self-assessment. Each maths lesson, I'll get them to look over the work and self-assess what they've done and reflect on it. Generally, at the beginning of the year, I'll give them a lot of suggestions of what they could think about on that, but then I kind of pull that scaffold away and get them to think about them for themselves, what they've done well, what they need to improve on.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so to take a slightly different tack, is that I feel like we've talked about like a lot of the kind of negative sides of thing, and we want to be balanced with that. But so let's say you're doing let's do something that I somewhat know about. Like, okay, let's say you're doing like a lesson on something mathematic related, or whatever, it's numeracy or whatever they call it these days.
I still call it maths.
Yeah. So, what kind of period of time would you have to actually do that?
To do a lesson?
Yeah. Or... How long would they spend doing just maths, for example?
Generally, we have about an hour and a half lesson each day of maths.
Okay.
Some of that's a starter activity to get them kind of going with it and get the brains warmed up. You'll have a bit of an input, and then get on with the work they're doing, and then we'll kind of come back together at the end and think about where we go next, basically.
Okay, so is it, if I'm understanding that correctly, you kind of will do something with everyone in the class to start with, then people go off and kind of do slightly different things, and then you kind of come back together and do something at the end. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly different sometimes with the way we do it, because we do kind of set them for maths in year 6. So we will generally we've got 3 year 6 teachers, so we split into 3 groups. So there's 2 year 6 classes that we split into three groups, basically.
Okay.
So we can kind of target what we need to target with that group of children. So your differentiation sometimes will not be as broad as in a normal class. So you might only have 2 different activities going on sometimes, as opposed to potentially 3 or 4.
Oh, okay, yeah. And okay, so let's say you're in like a lesson where you're running 3 or 4 different activities. Is that just you running that, or are there other people in the room with that as well?
Sometimes I'll have a teaching assistant, other times I won't. But often, if I'm on my own, especially doing it, I'll have 3 or 4 different activities going. They'll all be similar, but the kind of numbers might be slightly different, or so the concept's coming across, but them not having to. It's to their level, basically.
Okay, so they're all doing slightly different activities, but there's kind of a big picture that they're all kind of working on. Okay.
Yeah, so it could be they'll all be working on the same concept, but it might be slightly, like I say, slightly different numbers. It's just kind of pitched at their ability.
Okay, so I guess especially with primary school, one of the parts to it is really kind of, how do we make this stuff like relevant and engaging to them? So like, can you like talk about, it doesn't have to be like a maths, it could be about anything, like a lesson that you've done about where you can kind of identify where that fit in.
I mean, to make things relevant, especially with things like English, we tie it in with either things that are going on in the world, or often we tie it in with our class text. So when I go back in September, our class text will be an abridged version of Macbeth. So we do a lot of writing based on that. So we read up to kind of just before Duncan's murder, and then we get them to write what happens during Duncan's murder, and how Macbeth kills the king. And then,
just to pause you slightly, I'm slightly shocked that primary school kids are doing Shakespeare. When did that become a thing?
Yeah, it's been. I've done it ever since I started teaching. Basically, it's been something we do. Like I say, it's an abridged version. It's not a script. It's not in Shakespearean language that we use. But
okay, so it's
really enjoy it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's the story rather than the flowery language and poetry kind of side of things. Okay.
Although we do look at things like double, toil and trouble, and that whole witch's spell, and is this a dagger I see before me? And some of those scenes, the key scenes from Macbeth.
Wow, I'm still shocked that like 10 and 11-year-olds are learning about Shakespeare. I don't think I met it till I was like 15. Wow, okay.
I'm going to shamelessly plug as well that we get a theatre company in called the Handlebars.
It's not your brother's one by any chance, is that?
It's my brother. However, we don't get a discount. But yeah, they are well worth any school getting in if they want to teach Shakespeare, because it's accessible Shakespeare.
Okay, so that was the Handlebards, as in like Bard's poet. Okay, yeah, because they cycle around, hence the Handlebars. Yeah. Okay. After that, absolutely shameless marketing from Andy there. Okay, so I guess like we've talked about, kind of the marking, all the admin, all that kind of stuff, which I think typically are not people's favorite part of the job. You do find some crazy people who love all that thing, but I don't think that's generally true. So what is it about doing your job actually, like, because I think anyone can kind of turn around and say, oh, it's so rewarding, you know, we because you've seen how this young human being has turned out, and that's really nice, but you don't get that for like years, right? So like, what is it like day to day that's kind of good about your job?
You do. I mean, you do get that. It is good when you see a child, something click with a child, or you see a child do something that they've never done before. It's just, I mean, it's the interaction with people that, like, I mean, the staff that I work with are great. The kids that I work with are great. It's just, I just like going into school and interacting with them all. I mean, we just make things fun as well. I have a bit of a laugh when I'm teaching. It's not like, I'm not ridiculously serious and dead strict. You can see that the kids are enjoying that as well. And on top of that, it's all the other things, like I don't know if there's any other job where I could go from being a teacher to a sports coach to a choir leader to a musical director to doing computer technician to, there's just so many different things that you can end up doing in a school in one day.
Yeah. I always think it's a thing that's kind of, it's underplayed. So if you meet people who have interests in loads of different things, you're just like, you should be in a school. You can do all of that. You can actually do all of those things. You don't normally have to. So like at school, I could just basically show up, teach lessons, have a tutor group and go home. But if you have all these additional interests and stuff, you can get involved in as many things as your waking hours will fit in, generally speaking.
Yeah, definitely. Like I do get involved with quite a bit. Like I've coached numerous sports teams. I've run the choir and taken that, or co-run the choir, and we've taken that to numerous different concerts and been involved with different festivals and things. We do a year 6 production each year, which I tend to put a lot of work into. I know teachers that put their art skills to use and create big like artworks for around school. There's so many different things you can do, so many ways you can utilize your skills in school, and pass some of these skills on to the children as well. And they absolutely love it when they can see their teachers doing something that's not just maths or English in a slightly different environment in a way.
Yeah, and it's I think especially if you have the more, let's call them more challenging individuals, like doing all these things is actually a really good way of getting a better relationship with them. Like if you coach them sports or music or whatever, which is the thing they're really passionate about, they can have more buy-in when you're teaching them about Shakespeare and all this other stuff which they may be less interested in. And it's
utilizing those skills to build that relationship as well. Yeah, and kind of just, yeah, I've not got much more to say on that
one. Okay, and so kind of we've talked about how you got into it, kind of, and like what somewhat day to day is like with the different things you can do. So I think, especially having been in lockdown and stuff, a lot of stuff seems to be shifting fairly quickly with how schools work and things like that. I think even for maybe the last 10 years, people have been like, we're about to have this technological revolution, and it's sort of happened slowly in schools, but not really. There's a few places which have gone crazy with it, but most places have dabbled in a little bit, but not really gone the route of going, we're going to wholesale change everything. So how can you see like your work being different maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
I mean, as of now, my school hasn't done Zoom lessons or anything like that. What we've done instead is kind of put links to different, we've kind of written a plan out for each week of what activities the children should be doing. We've linked to different resources around the internet. I know Oak National Academy has been an invaluable resource that we've used, but potentially if we have another lockdown or anything like that, we will try and do things a bit more differently. I'd spent a lot of time over lockdown looking into Microsoft Teams because we are an Office 365 school.
Okay. Yeah.
So all our staff are currently starting to use Teams, some more than others. We've had a few meetings on there, some of us, and potentially that's a way forward that we can use with the children to host. One thing that I have already started doing was I'd host a OneDrive folder online with any resources that the children would need. So moving things online is going to be a massive thing over the next few years, I think. We are looking into resources such as Seesaw, which is kind of an online portfolio of work almost. So the children it's just an app on the iPad. They log in either using a QR code, or older children use their school email address, and they basically can take pictures of things or do an activity on there and upload it so the teacher can then see it, mark it, and they can get almost instant feedback on it. So I can see apps like that becoming more and more useful over the next few years.
So that would kind of come under the heading of sort of progress tracking, that kind of thing. Okay. So kind of hopefully moving away from kind of the extremes of coronavirus and somewhat normality returning. Like, are there any kind of, if you're actually in the classroom, are there any areas you think that might change in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, I can see more technology being introduced. I know we at the moment have about 50 iPads as a school. We currently still have a computer suite, which I think is an invaluable resource, but until iPads and tablets and things become more accessible in a way. I know with Flash going out the window now that a lot more websites and programs will be more usable on an iPad, like Scratch, for example. We do a lot of programming through Scratch, but up until the last year or so, you've not been able to do that on an iPad. It's had to be on a computer. So I can see more tablets and iPads being introduced.
And so, like, when you mentioned that, so that's something that's kind of come in over the last few years. So they've actually started to do programming at kind of primary school.
Yeah, that started about 5 years ago. And it is block based. We do little bits of like text-based programming, like a little bit of Python. I've done some HTML in the past with them.
Okay, yeah. So the reason I mentioned that is I always, because every few years there's an announcement that, in primary schools, children are now going to be learning X, Y, and Z. So like a few years ago, it was like languages, like they're suddenly going to be learning French or Spanish or whatever. And there's suddenly a load of primary school teachers going, wait, what? And then obviously the latest one I think was probably programming, where a load of primary school teachers are probably going, well, I figured out how to log into email and I have to now teach programming. Like, how's that been?
It has been a big leap for some staff. Luckily, we do have a HLTA in school, a higher level teaching assistant who is very good at computing. So she's been working with a lot of the classes on their computing and programming side of things. I kind of teach all of the year 6 programming and computing at the moment. I'm not very good at art, so luckily the other year 6 teacher is very good at art.
Okay.
So what we do is we swap over, and we're almost like a mini secondary school in year 6, where they won't have the same teacher all day every day. We'll kind of swap and change for different things.
But the implication of what you're saying is kind of lower down in the school, as a teacher, you would be expected to teach all of the things.
Yeah, generally, everyone will just teach their class. You don't really see the other teachers in your building or in your year group as much.
I think it's one of the things people probably don't know about. I think more so primary school than secondary school. I wouldn't say I occasionally have to go away and learn some physics that has been found out since I learned physics, or because I did engineering or physics. I sometimes have to go and update my subject knowledge a little bit. But I think the thing you probably wouldn't necessarily expect, I think most people would be like, oh, it's primary school. Like, I don't need particularly high knowledge in all of the things, but it's just the having to be ready to kind of update your knowledge of things you've never even necessarily done before is something you probably wouldn't expect.
Yeah, and I feel like it happens on a fairly regular basis. I mean, the curriculum changed in 2014, so that was where the really big overhaul came. I feel like since then, our the writing curriculum for year 6, the criteria that they are assessed against has kind of been tweaked multiple times. So we've spent quite a bit of time learning what some of the things mean, like the what's the term that they used a couple of years ago? The appropriate register. You have to write in the appropriate register. So we spent a long time discussing that. But yeah, programming is probably the biggest thing that's been brought in recently. But then over the last couple of years as well, there's been the new Ofsted framework that they've announced. So we've had to kind of go back and look at our foundation curriculum and basically make that a bit more fit for purpose, because we realised there were gaps that we were missing. So we just had to we just keep tweaking things and changing things, and it's never kind of just, I can't see it ever just being left as is.
Yeah, I think I guess you can see it as a negative thing, because obviously you have to put in the work for changing stuff. But I always think it's quite good, because I'm about to start year 9 as a teacher, and I was like, if every year was the same, I would have probably quit and gone to a different job by now. I think the fact that every few years, it's annoying as hell, but the fact that every few years, your job changes in some way, I think is quite refreshing.
Just keep it interesting. Where you're not just I could just have taught the same set of lessons every year, but I haven't. It's quite nice. I mean, we've changed quite a bit around this year, because the advice from Ofsted is that history should be now chronological. So, as in year 3 should be teaching the very early stages of history, and year 6 should be teaching the kind of later things.
Oh, because they're implying that they can somehow make causal links between being this created this then created this, and some.
Yeah. Even though some things happen at the same time as well, they want that you kind of got to put things chronologically. So that's been a massive change around for a lot of year groups, because we had Victorians being taught in year 3, for example, which has now been moved, and they're now teaching Bronze Age and Stone Age and things like that.
That teacher's going to end up knowing a lot of history after they've done that for a few years.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess at this point, with the other people I've had on, I give an opportunity is there something that people should know about being a primary school teacher that they probably don't?
It's not a 9 till 3:30 job, and with lots and lots of holidays through the year.
Just to clarify, there are lots of holidays throughout the year.
There are lots of holidays throughout the year, but I do spend a lot of them catching up on things. Like the first 2 weeks of this summer holiday, I was in and out of school. The last week of this summer holiday, I will be in and out of school, trying to get things ready for September. And other holidays, I tend to just be catching up on things and getting stuff done. It's not just, I don't just go away on holiday every single time we get a break. Also, schools, contrary to what some people think, schools haven't been closed through lockdown.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
We worked, we were open we were open all week. Not necessarily everyone was teaching every day of the week, but we were open, and we were open through the holidays as well for key worker children.
Yeah, and I think it's there's obviously you can really read sensationalized stuff in a few of media groups that I'm not going to name because there's no need to get into that kind of thing. But like, yeah, I think most people kind of appreciate that everyone's just been figuring stuff out, and it's not been the way you might like or expect. But yeah, going back to the thing you said about hours, because I'm a physicist, obviously I went back and did some calculations. I think I worked out I basically work the same number of hours as someone else does, but I just do them in a much more concentrated period, and then you do have like some time over the summer, which is obviously a complete break. But I never think I work harder than anybody else, but I don't think I work less either.
No, I'm the same. I wouldn't say I work harder than other people, but yeah, I wouldn't say I'm lazing around and doing very little.
Although I will say in the first few years as a teacher, I definitely was working harder than other people, and then that sort of wanes a bit once you've got a few years in. But I think to start with, it can be a bit life altering.
Yeah, your first few years of teaching are definitely hard work because you've got to kind of find your feet and get a basis. And once you've got all that planning there that you can kind of tweak unless everything changes, like we talked about before, it does kind of give you a bit less to do.
Okay. Was there anything else, or have we kind of covered what it's like to be somewhat apprentice?
I'm hoping we've not been too negative there, because it is a fun job. I do enjoy it, and it is, like we've already touched on, it is a rewarding job, and there is so many different things you can do, and so many opportunities out there. But yeah, I hope if people are thinking of going into teaching, then go for it, but just think about the amount of work.
Yeah, I think I might put a disclaimer at the start, being like, if you want to hear the nice bits, you might want to skip to this time, and then maybe come back to the start at the end. But I think it is important that, I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast is I think thinking of kind of people I teach that are kind of finishing school and trying to make decisions about what they want to do with their future. I think I want them to have like a somewhat accurate picture of what it's like doing various things. And obviously you can look in the newspapers and stuff, but I think it is important to know that being a teacher is really fun, really exciting, and I think it gives you way more variety than almost any other job I can think of.
Definitely.
As in, whenever I think about changing career, I just think that sounds so boring. It's like just sat, at a desk, or even if you're in a startup or something, all the things that you might consider working for Google really fun, but you still spend most of your day sat in front of a computer answering emails, going to meetings, and doing all these things. And I'm just like, actually, I can't imagine not doing all the different exciting things that I do as a teacher. So it's a real plus.
I mean, teaching can be busy. It can be stressful. Sometimes some of the things that you make yourself even busier with are somewhat unnecessary, but they can sometimes be some of the more fun things to do. For example, planning a show, planning a trip, all these things that are not strictly have to be done, but are actually some of the more fun things.
Those are the things where you're, a lot of people say when they become a teacher, I want to make a difference. And it's like, however good your lesson on Oxbow Lakes is, it's not going to have like life-changing impact on a student, whereas like the trip that you take them on to the science museum may provoke them, I know, a real interest in them in what is it, young kids, dinosaurs. Oh no, they'll already be interested in dinosaurs by then, but like something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that. If you actually are going into teaching to be a difference maker, I think being their sports coach and their music coach and stuff is where you're going to do that.
Yeah, I'd say it is the extra things that do count.
However much, when you get to the end of the day and you're like, I really don't want to do this. And then you start doing it and it's really fun, so it's fine. But yeah.
Yeah, there are a few times where I've done a club and not felt like it at the time, and then I've come away from it thinking, that's put me in a better mood.
Okay, so the one thing I will kind of finish with, if there are kind of people listening and they're thinking about becoming a teacher, I think the single most useful thing that I've learned as a teacher is the word no.
Yeah.
As in, you can end up filling your time with an unbelievable amount of stuff, and schools know this when you first join them and ask you to do all kinds of different things. And I think, especially when you start being a teacher, the word no is incredibly important. Being like, no, I don't have the time to do that, or no, I don't want to go on this extra thing that I don't need.
Yeah, don't feel like you can't say no as well.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you can't keep up with everything, especially the kind of important stuff to do with your class, then you need to I learned this lesson a few years ago where I needed to just cut back on what I was doing. And to be honest, it has made my work-life balance a lot better. And I've not missed running around trying to do a different club each of the 5 nights a week plus a staff meeting.
Yeah. And I think the other side of it is, in school, everyone will tell you everything is essential and a priority. And so you actually, as an individual, have to make up your own mind what is essential and a priority, because everyone thinks that everything is essential and a priority. And you just have to be like, well, that can't be true. So I guess it's being left to me to figure out which of those is essential and a priority. Okay, so that brings us to the end for that conversation. I hope you enjoyed finding out what it's like day to day and being a primary school teacher, and how you get into it and how you think it might change. And I hope you stuck with it and got some of the exciting part of the job, as well as some of the more negative stuff earlier on. But thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Hope you enjoyed.